Well, here's my review of Disenchanted. It was bad. Thanks for hearing my thoughts about the movie. Bye. I do feel a little weird though that I thought a lot more people would have bitched about the movie by this point, considering Enchanted from 2007 is a beloved Disney film, and now that it's been 15 years later and people will see the sequel to a movie that they were nostalgic for, with it turning out to be underwhelming, people would blow it out of proportion and say it's one of the worst things ever, which I'm just used to people complaining about these things by this point to that degree, and then 2 months later they move on to the next thing. How could this have happened? The sequel is directed by Adam Shankman. You don't know who he is? Oh, he made such movies as The Wedding Planner, The Pacifier, Bringing Down the House, Bedtime Stories, Cheaper by the Dozen 2, Rock of Ages, and the list goes on. So I totally would get this guy to make an Enchanted sequel. What, wouldn't you? Now, I didn't necessarily think the first movie needed a sequel, but I wasn't against the idea, considering the world and the ideas it had. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Enchanted is a movie that involves Giselle, played by Amy Adams, who is the epitome of an animated Disney princess, at the time at least, who thinks she is going to have her happily ever after until she's sent into the real world of New York City, just like the Smurfs. As the real world will conflict with the fairy tale world she comes from, and as she falls for a lawyer played by Patrick Dempsey. And you know, it's funny to me though, not to sound rude, but while Dempsey at the time was huge, the supporting actors like James Marsden and Idina Menzel overshadow him right now. Or, you know, he could have just done at least more movies. But besides that, in terms of what I think of the first movie, I don't love it. I think being made by Disney themselves, which is a parody of Disney princesses, then making a comedy about this isn't as 100% as it could have been, because given the premise of a fairy tale princess in the real world, it could have been compared to a R rating with how much more darker or satirical they could have gone with. But despite that, the movie is still great because it has great performances, characters, and respect for what came prior, and setting an unspoken precedent for many Disney movies to follow. So with that said, the sequel. The sequel is not that. A sequel is, it just does everything wrong with what a sequel should do, but not to an obnoxious degree. Trust me, I've seen worse movies this year. So it's not like the worst, it's just a bad movie. So, you know. But it's not an insult to the first film, is what I'm trying to say, but it does nothing better nor on par, let alone anything actually good on its own. The premise this time is that it's now 10 years later. Sure, I mean, you know, real life it's 15 years later, but whatever. We're now that Giselle is married to Robert Phillip, the lawyer character played by Patrick Dempsey, and Giselle's stepdaughter Morgan, played by Gabriella Baldacchino, I hope the guy pronounced that right, is now a teenager, and they have a new baby. The baby is just only serves a purpose that they have to move from their NYC apartment to the suburbs, and that's it. Like, they could cut the baby from the movie, and it changed nothing. But back to the premise. So anyways, they move to the suburbs, but get this, it's not perfect. So, with the return of Mardsen and Menzel's characters from the first film, with Mardsen being Giselle's original fiance from the fairy tale world, I know he has a name, I don't care, with Menzel marrying Mardsen instead and living in their world, they shove from the magical well they put in their backyard in the suburban home, even though I'm pretty sure the first movie was like, the sewer, or, no, it was like, yeah, no, they appeared from a manhole. I don't know. It's whatever. It's like, it's a nitpick where I'm like to let that slide, but there's other stuff I will complain about, so keep that in mind. But here's the thing. They give her, or at least them, I forget who specifically, but they give them a magic wand as a housewarming gift. And then the movie becomes WandaVision. So Giselle wishes for suburbia to be a lot more like the fairy tale world. So it becomes, you know, fairy tale world. I know it also has a name, I don't care. With only her knowing the truth. I mean, it's not that bad of an idea, but it's handled poorly. She doesn't intentionally wish for it, I think, but the next day is literally a fairy tale world. And I think it would have been more interesting if it was over time the world became more and more fairy tale-like than it just being instantly. Like, because that leads to my other problems with the movie. So Giselle is in the wrong in the movie for doing this, but it's not because she changed reality, it's because since it's a fairy tale world now, and she's a stepmother, she has to be evil. I mean, that's why she's evil in the movie. You know, because when I think from the trailers with them, you know, hyping up she being the bad guy in this movie this time, I would think, oh, because she changed the world, this is corrupting her. It's like, no, it's just because she's a stepmother now. Because Cinderella had one, therefore every princess in every story ever has to have an evil step-parent. Because, you know, that's how it always works, you know? I mean, you know, because if that didn't happen, I guess then that means doing this was okay. This movie just does everything wrong with the first movie. It's not subtle, like they constantly compare the real world to how they wish a fairy tale world would be like, with them realizing the world they come from now is a stereotypical fairy tale world, rather than just being like, oh, she just knows this as the place she's from, so it gets obnoxious. And on top of that, you know what else this movie suffers through? Being boring. The conflict is that sets this all into motion. It's just so lame and petty. And by trying to make your main character on purpose do nothing wrong, it makes me not care to see them get better. It just feels like the movie making excuses for the character rather than the character just being flawed and therefore sympathetic. Because the movie's just like, nah, it's because she's a stepmother now, that's what makes her evil. Not because she changed reality, but what do I know? Now, Amy Adams, I will say this, she gives it her all as this character, and she's still great, especially her conflicting good bad sides. The other actors are okay, although I love this scene where I won't spoil the context, but Idina Menzel looks like she's thinking, this is so stupid. Also, this movie is just easily forgettable. Well, why is it forgettable? I'll get to that in a bit, because I forgot right now. Now, Maya Rudolph, though, was also in the movie, if you saw her on the poster. And get this, she sucks. I mean, I don't have anything against Maya Rudolph. I think she can be funny. But she plays the villain here, and nah, she can't play a villain. She just can't. It feels fake and phony. It's honestly, worst of all, she's just not funny in the role. I don't even remember a single joke I laughed at, let alone laughing at the movie in general. Again, I was just bored. It's on Disney Plus, and it feels like this was made with it in mind. And there's nothing wrong with that, but smaller scale, the settings look like a regular town that poorly are putting on a Renaissance fair. It feels like a Disney Channel movie, honestly. The CGI, the scope, it just looks lesser as it feels. Now, with Morgan's character being unhappy with the moves she has, you know, here, if I had to improve the movie, here's my pitch for what they should have done with the sequel. Have her run away to the fairy tale world, and Giselle go after her and go off from there. I don't know, maybe there's a new villain, revenge, I don't know. I think it would have been more interesting to see them with how the real world, okay, how Giselle comes from a world of fantasy and how that conflicts with the real world. If Morgan went to a fantasy world and conflicts with the real world she comes from, hoping it'd be easier, I think that would have been a more interesting dynamic. But, you know, I didn't make this movie, and it was in development hell for a while, so I'm sure they had no idea really what to do with a sequel after the first. But this isn't how you do it. And I don't know what else to say, though, because, I mean, this movie isn't horrendous, but I have very little positive to say about it. I mean, this movie is a musical, and that's what I meant to say what I forgot about this movie, because this movie has so forgettable music. It's boring, it's a drag, it feels like it's stretching out the movie. There are musical numbers before even the world becomes a fairy tale. Like, you think, oh, it's a musical because the world becomes a fairy tale world. It's like, no, there are musical numbers before that happens, even though in the first movie, this is a reality that isn't a musical. And which I guess maybe I would have been fine with if the music was good, but it's not. In fact, now that Idina Menzel is popular, of course they gave her her own song. And one of the lines in it, and I'm not even sure this is the title of it, but one of the lines that just made my eyes grown so much was, "Let it glow." Oh, it's just like from Moana. And you know what? I'm just going to forget this movie. It's not terrible. I can see kids liking this, and maybe its fan base will be more respectful of it than I think, but for me, this movie just had nothing to keep me enchanted about it. I give Disenchanted a 4 out of 10. Just like the Smurfs. I'm just kidding, the Smurfs copied that in every other stupid cash grab movie. I should cut this line.